Cold War. Remember that one? If not, let me remind you. The Cold War was a frightening global showdown for supremacy that lasted 45 years. So on one side of the ring, you have the United States rolling heavy with their squad, the Western Bloc, and on the other side, you have the Soviet Union rolling with the Eastern Bloc. Now it's pretty much a no-brainer that neither side was playing nice. They were all too busy scheming, plotting, and planning, trying to outmaneuver one another in this epic battle of supremacy. So much that some people forgot all about things like, ethics. But let me tell you, my friends, right there in the midst of this global fear and chaos, it was knowledge that became the ultimate weapon. Governments crave power. In fact, they wanted it so bad, they started resorting to some downright savage methods of obtaining it. Because today we're deep diving into what really went down in this former government safe house, where Uncle Sam cooked up a little something extra spicy called Project MKUltra. More specifically, we're going to look at the secret agent named George White, who ran the program and went to extreme lengths to keep it going. And by keeping it going, I'm referring to the part of the program where White had hired sex workers to secretly dose unsuspecting men with LSD. This is all part of an elaborate scheme proposed to extract information from unknowing citizens and report it back to White, whose ultimate goal in all of this was learning to perfect the art of brainwashing. I said brainwashing, not eating. Come on. So without further delay, this is the story of Colonel George Hunter White and the government program he ran out of this house, a sub-project of MKUltra, appropriately named Project Midnight Climax. Back on the 10th of April, 1953, newly appointed director of the CIA, a bigwig named Allen Dulles, he gave a speech to a bunch of Princeton alumni to address the growing concern within the United States on what Dulles referred to as Soviet brain perversion techniques and brain warfare. Global tensions ran high with the Korean War recently coming to an end, and just earlier that week, the New York Times had published an eye-opening feature story that told about American POWs returning to the US, who might have been, quote, converted to communist brainwashing. So it's not surprising the stories of this new form of brain warfare immediately gripped the American public with gut-wrenching fear. I mean, people were terrified. Just the mere thought of having communists take over their brains sent a shockwave throughout the country. And it didn't take long for the growing tidal wave of fear to seep into American mainstream culture, some of which can be seen in great literary works of that time, with books like the exquisite title Naked Lunch, written by William S. Burroughs, as well as Richard Condon's The Manchurian Candidate. Both best-selling books explored themes of deranged scientists, mind control, and deep political conspiracy. But you know what they say, the truth is always stranger than fiction. And indeed it is, because only 3 days after his Princeton speech, where he shamed the Soviets' brainwashing techniques, Allen Dulles himself approved a secret operation to covertly study the use of biological and chemical materials on the brain. This eventually became to be known as Project MKUltra. Now, the experiments under MKUltra were referred to as mind control, and they pretty much focused on aiding interrogations by way of behavior modification and brainwashing using methods such as electroshock therapy, hypnosis, polygraphs, radiation, and let's not forget the never-ending 24/7 buffet of drugs, toxins, and chemicals fed to the test subjects. Now, the subjects who were part of this first wave of the program, they ranged from boys from state schools to American soldiers to drug addicts to even sexual psychopaths who were locked up in state hospital. But there are a few notable people who took part in the LSD experiments that you might have heard of. Acid evangelist and author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Ken Kesey, Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter, and of course, famed mob boss Whitey Bulger. He took part in the LSD testing when he was an inmate just across the bay from here on a little rock known as Alcatraz. So after Project MKUltra kicked off, the government's focus on using drugs like LSD and liquid marijuana on test subjects, it shifted from a very defensive stance to a highly offensive one. And as you can guess, it was no shocker. The powers that be saw the potential of LSD and the power of control it had over an informant's mind, whether willingly or not. and it was unanimously decided that conducting LSD dosing experiments on unwilling test subjects was absolutely necessary to truly understand the drug's value and what it could hold over a person's mind. The government knew that the public's reaction to learning about MK Ultra's secret dosing would not have been pleasant, and if they would have found out, it would have ultimately caused a gigantic shitstorm of rage and revolt to sweep throughout the country. So being deemed crucial for national security, this program had to be kept highly secure and confidential at all costs. And miraculously, the project was kept under wraps, so much so that the LSD experiments, they became even more deranged, and they graduated on from dosing unwell inmates to the general public. This is where George White enters. Now, there was one key figure in this highly unethical program who basically ran the show right here at 225, and that was a narcotics agent named George Hunter White. George White built his reputation as the ultimate anti-drug crusader, leading fierce investigation into all sorts of world-renowned hopheads and drug rings, busting them all. But you see, White didn't just stick to catching the small fish, he went after the big ones too. And in 1947, he famously arrested Billie Holiday in an opium bust right down at the Mark Twain Hotel here in San Francisco. Now, we'll have an episode on that, a different episode of Bay Area Babylon, so hold tight for that one. But anyways, George White, he carved out a reputation as a no-nonsense, heavy-handed agent who wasn't afraid to lay down the hammer on you, no matter who you were or who you knew. And you best listen up and understand that George White, well, he was the kind of guy who played by his own rules. And if you didn't like the game he was playing, then tough shit. George White was intelligent, cunning, and extremely hypocritical. Because while he waged a fierce battle against those involved in the drug use and distribution, White himself was very much into the tipping the bottle himself. White's professional journey started right here in San Francisco as a journalist for the Bulletin. But pounding the typewriter keyboard just wasn't enough action for White. So he turned his professional sights and knuckles towards enforcing the law. And after being rejected from several law enforcement agencies, White eventually hit the jackpot and landed a sweet gig as a narcotics agent for the Office of Strategic Services. And this gig, it was just perfect for White because his new work took him to many exotic and dangerous places around the world, where he helped dismantle illegal drug rings running through France, Italy, and even Turkey. His deep understanding of both sides of the drug landscape had positioned him as a natural leader. And after serving time abroad busting bad guys, White was recruited to spearhead a shoot-off project of MK Ultra, specifically overseeing the safe house across the street, where liquid marijuana and LSD were secretly being given to unknowing subjects. Here George White showed a true talent for interpretive rule-breaking, and he took a unique approach to investigations, began spiking drinks and cigarettes with a side of justice, all in the name of the law. Well, kinda. And for the next 8 years, behind closed doors, or should I say, behind a two-way mirror, George Hunter White was basically the ringleader for a booze-fueled psychedelic circus experiment gone wrong. White himself would often go undercover, and he'd dose unknowing people just to see if the LSD loosened their lips enough to spill the beans. One time, in fact, while attempting to extract mafia secrets, he handed a notorious mob boss a marijuana-laced cigarette, turning an interrogation into an unexpected psychedelic trip. And before long, White had the mafioso blubbering like a baby, turning over all kinds of juicy secrets to the one person he shouldn't be. White did such an outstanding job at his Greenwich Village job that he was given the critical role overseeing the government's brand new offshoot program of MK Ultra known as Operation Midnight Climax. You gotta understand, it was now 1954, and not only US citizens, but the actual government, Uncle Sam himself, was gripped by fear. A fear that the Soviet Union would somehow monopolize the entire LSD market and use it as some sort of a chemical doomsday device to turn all the Americans' brain into nacho cheese. And this had the guys from Langley more focused than ever exploring the use of unconventional weapons against our enemies. And because of all of this, they found excellent potential in hallucinogenic sensory drugs like LSD. And to evaluate how effectively these drugs worked on the common person, they started administering these drugs to unsuspecting people without their consent. And it's important to point out that there were many psychologists around the globe who believed these conscious-altering substances held great potential as great tools for addressing mental illnesses like schizophrenia and depression. But nevertheless, Uncle Sam had a much different outlook on these substances and the potential that they held. And by now you have to be wondering just who in the hell in their right mind was leading this insane experiment. Well, none other than a dude named Stanley Gottlieb, a brainiac chemist from the good old US of A. And Gottlieb, well, he was like a mad scientist, straight out of a sci-fi flick, dabbling in everything from mescaline to morphine to psilocybin to amphetamines. Every drug from A to Z, he wanted to see how far it would take people. Now, the entire project was like some crazy chemistry class on steroids, but instead of making papier-mâché volcanoes erupt with tomato sauce, they were trying to alter people's minds with dangerous drugs. Well, Gottlieb, that old boy, he decided to throw his ethical standards right out of the window and go rogue with his experiments. He started to dole out drugs like candy at a carnival. And for all the poor souls involved, well, they wouldn't mind having their brains lit on fire for the next 10 hours, would they? Now, if you're scratching your head thinking, wait a second, isn't consent kind of a big deal? Then you're absolutely right, my friend, absolutely right. Because back in 1949, a thing called the Nermberg Code set in place ethical standards for science experiments that used human subjects, saying that they must give proper consent in order to take part. But old Gottlieb, bless his black heart, he just shrugged his shoulders and carried on secretly, dosing John Q. Public like it was no big deal. Ah, the good old days of medical research, where ethics were just a suggestion, and consent was, well, optional, at least according to the good doctor's playbook. But anyways, back to George White. Right from Jump Street, Gottlieb was impressed by White's unconventional skills, so much so he thought that the hard-drinking White, he deserved a raise. He was snapped up out of the Greenwich Village project, given a one-way ticket, and sent right here to set up a secret safe house that doubled as a brothel in the house right behind me in Russian Hill. And today it stands as a beautiful piece of San Francisco real estate. But back in the late 1950s and early 60s, it was no ordinary house. It was an elaborate trap. Now, you're not gonna find too many better views than from up here. In fact, the place across the street, it features insane views of the whole bay. And with the picturesque backdrop outside, George Hunter White made sure his elaborate surveillance system captured every little naughty tidbit unfolding inside. Purchasing and then writing off large amounts of furniture, White transformed the L-shaped apartment here at 225 into the ultimate swinging San Francisco pad. He recruited a Berkeley grad student and had him set up this elaborate bugging system with microphones that looked like electrical outlets, so that White could hear all the conversations, and of course all of the moaning and groaning from every room in the house. But White's knack for aesthetics, that didn't stop there, because lining the walls were pictures of French dancers, dreary flowers, and lots of kinky images of women in bondage. Long, lush red curtains were draped from the windows, while framed artwork were adorned with black silk scarves. And let's not forget about the two-way mirror that White had installed in the bedroom, where he and his cohorts could safely watch the action from the other side, all while downing one martini after the next, all while the unsuspecting people on the other side spilled their guts. In fact, White enjoyed viewing all of the action in the encounter so much that he had a portable toilet and a refrigerator installed on his side of the mirror so he would never have to miss a beat of the action. Yikes! White enlisted undercover sex workers to entice unwitting clients back to the house here and into the bedroom, where they were dosed with LSD and taken on the ride of their life, all while White was mere feet away taking close notes. And in exchange for their participation, the sex workers received modest cash payments and White's assurance that he would intervene on their behalf in any future encounters that they might have with law enforcement. So let's just say you're out on the town enjoying a few drinks when an attractive woman you don't know, she comes up and buys you a drink. She invites you back to her place for a nightcap. You end up inside the apartment that breathes nothing but allure and seduction. You take the drink that's offered to you, or maybe smoke that cigarette out of the lady's pack. 20 minutes later, the walls start to melt, and the woman you just met an hour earlier, she wastes no time and pulls you onto the bed with her, where you undress and succumb to her seduction. Right after the climax, the euphoria and introspective thinking gets you so intense that you spill your guts about every bad thing you ever did. All of this to a woman you never met before tonight. And if that's not creepy enough, all the while, several feet away from your naked, shivering body, sits a portly man on a toilet, enjoying a drink and the show that he just watched. Oh, and he was also busy taking notes on everything that came out of your mouth. And before long, you're shuffled out of the house and told to sleep off the head high and forget that the entire night ever happened. It was all just a bad dream? Now, the safe house here across the street at 225 Chestnut, it shut down operations in 1965. Now, in the spring of that year, some high-ups in the government stumbled upon some classified documents and information regarding MK Ultra's knack for regularly dosing innocent civilians. And not surprisingly, they were pissed and wanted answers. The United States Inspector General firmly brought down the hammer and terminated all programs involving non-consensual specimens. Now, surprisingly, the 8-year mission yielded almost no results for the spies who ran it. And despite their underhanded efforts, White and his agents failed to find a viable mind control technique or truth serum that could actually be used against America's archenemies. Although the study did produce one notable piece of data from their research, and that just happens to be that the best moment in a sexual encounter to extract information from a source was right after the orgasm. Who would have thought? Now, the majority of the identities who were subjected to LSD during the MK Ultra tests, they're pretty much lost to history. Apparently, old George White, he explicitly instructed everyone under the operation never to document the details of their activities. And in 1973, all known records of the MK Ultra program were eradicated. The government reevaluated the operation in 1977 and characterized the program as offensive, unethical, and illegal. And let's not forget about the house. From its seedy beginnings to a real estate goldmine, 225 Chestnut Street had a makeover so epic that even Mrs. Doubtfire would be jealous. Once a bustling brothel under George White's watchful eye, it's now a luxurious 6,000 square foot palace with more bedrooms than you can count. And in 2015, this slice of real estate heaven was snapped up for a cool $10 million. And as for George White, well, he didn't stay in San Francisco for much longer after the project got shut down. In 1965, he safely retired from federal government, relocating across the Golden Gate Bridge to Stinson Beach, where he assumed the role of chief in the local fire department. Now, in all the research I did, I find it interesting that even the staff was instructed to destroy all the documents regarding Project MK Ultra, that George White himself kept very detailed personal journals, noting both the operations as well as his methods. But in many ways it makes sense. He was a former journalist, after all, very much used to taking detailed, copious notes. But then curiously, after White's passing, his widow donated the entire collection of his journals and pictures to Foothill College, just 40 miles south of here, in a town called Los Altos, where this special collection had been transferred over to Stanford University, where it lives today, and can be viewed by the public, but only if you make an appointment in advance. Still up for more secret spies and sabotage stories? Good. Then check out my book pick for this episode, which happens to be none other than author John Lisley's 2023 release titled The Dirty Tricks Department, Stanley Lovell, the OSS, and the Masterminds of World War II Secret Warfare. So dig this. It's 1942 and this hotshot chemistry guy named Stanley Oliver, he gets a message to show up at this shady spot in DC. No maps, no GPS, just a be there or else kind of message. So Oliver strolls in, probably expecting it to be some type of top-secret lab experiment, or maybe even a surprise party. But what does he find? Nothing. None other than an empty, barren room. Suddenly, in walks Wild Bill Donovan, the big cheese over at the OSS. That's the Office of Strategic Services, to all of you like me who slept through 7th grade history. Well, Donovan starts the convo off with a line straight out of a detective novel, telling Lovell that he's Sherlock Holmes, and hinting around that he's Moriarty. Now that's a recruitment pitch. And just like that, Lovell finds himself leading a secret society of scientists, cooking up schemes and gadgets that made him half James Bond and half MacGyver. We're talking bat bombs, suicide pills, knives so sneaky they could probably attend a ninja convention without getting noticed. Feeling kinda hungry? Then how about some K or L pills? The tasteless little poison tablets guaranteed to ruin your day. And for those moments when you just need a good gossip session, they even rolled out cigarettes spiked with a little something extra to loosen those lips. But it didn't stop there. These guys were like the mad scientists of espionage, forging documents, plotting assassinations, and dabbling in truth serum experiments, as we talked about earlier in this episode. Now fast forward to today, and we're still feeling the ripples of their antics. MK Ultra? Yeah, that's their brainchild. The stuff conspiracy theories are made of. So grab your popcorn and dive into the Dirty Tricks Department, where Cloak and Dagger meets mad scientists. And the only thing crazier than the inventions are the people behind them. Thanks so much for joining us today, and as always, we'll see you next time here on Bay Area Babylon.